Today, we're talking with Mitch Stein, one of the West Coast's most in-demand keyboardists. He started playing piano at the age of 4, studied at Berkeley, and has since performed with a staggering range of artists, including Dizzy Gillespie, Bob Weir, our man David Grisman, Oteil Burbridge, Derek Trucks, Phil Lesh, and Jeff Skunk Baxter. Mitch, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Welcome.
I tell you what. All right, I'm going to go completely off the rails and do what I told you that we totally weren't. Jeff Skunk Baxter, I know you played with Purdy too. Well, why don't we start there and let's figure the rest of it out from there.
Sure. So in my list of people with whom I've played, there is a wide variety of playing circumstances in which I did so. The Skunk Baxter one happened years ago in Las Vegas when Scott Page, the sax player from Pink Floyd, reached out to me, and he said, first of all, he said, "Hey, I'm Scott Page," and I was like, "The sax player from Pink Floyd?" And, he clarified, "Yeah." And he said, I'm producing an event called the Grand Scientific Musical Theater. It's going to be happening during Comdex, which was a very popular annual computer. I don't even know if it's still going, but Comdex was an annual computer industry event. And he had this crazy idea to put together a multimedia show. This was, I am embarrassed that I'm not remembering the year, but it was kind of in the early days of, the internet and virtual reality. All that stuff was sort of in its infancy. And he reached out to me and he said, "You've been recommended to me as somebody who could put a cyber band together. Is that something you could do?" And in my mind, I'm like, what the heck is a cyber band? But of course they said, "Oh yeah, sure, I could do that."
I'm your guy.
No problem. So he explained to me that this event was going to be 2 weeks from that day. And, could I do this? And they would, fly us to Las Vegas and put us up and all that stuff. And I said, "Sure, no problem." So we hung up and I immediately started reaching out to my network, not knowing what he exactly meant by cyber band, but I put the word out and I said, "I'm looking for something that really focuses on the emerging technology as it applies to music." And through that network, I was introduced to Chris Van Raalte, who's a local guy who invented and has a patent on something called the body synth. And the body synth is essentially a series of electrodes worn all over the body. So as someone flexes and relaxes, it translates that minute electrical energy into what's called a MIDI signal. Well, that MIDI signal can then be sent to any instrument or piece of equipment that can read and understand and respond to MIDI signals. So in this particular case, Chris, who is a dancer who invented this, he would dance in tempo, and while he's moving all his muscles, he's playing a drum kit, if you can imagine such a thing.
Nice.
So that was one element of our cyber band. And then through another group of people, I was introduced to a gentleman named John Vincent from Canada, who had invented and I believe got a patent on something called the Mandala Virtual Reality System, which I didn't even see it, but as soon as I heard the name, I'm like, okay, this sounds promising. And I came to find out that if you're familiar with green screen, or what a weatherman or a weatherwoman uses when they're giving the weather, behind them they've got the screen, and then that is combined and sent out and mixed where the green is removed and whatever you want in the background is replaced. And in this case, Vincent had rigged up a computer and a camera system such that he was against a green background, but he had a three-dimensional component to it. So when it's multiple cameras, it was more than just one camera, so you could deal with the angles. So he could and did, for example, in the computer, draw a brand new fictional animated drum kit. And when that was mixed with the signal from him against the green screen, he's playing a drum over here and over here just by waving his arms, because he's looking at the combined image like a weather person would do. So he can see where the drums are in virtual reality, and he's playing them. Nobody had ever seen anything like this.
Wow.
So I got a standard bass player and a female vocalist And we got together 2 weeks, well, a little less than 2 weeks, because it took me a couple of days to find these folks. But we all got together, and I said, look, this is a unique thing for all of us. I don't know if this is ever going to come around again, so let's put our heads together. Let's come up with some original music that features these instruments and everything that we want to do. And so that's what we did. We spent the first couple of days just brainstorming musical ideas, and out of that came 2 or 3 original pieces of music, which sort of fit into the time that we were going to be given. So we rehearsed those as best we could, with everyone having day jobs and everything else. And we had a couple of rehearsals in advance and felt okay about it. Well, we flew to Vegas 2 days before the event. And the very first thing we did was we got into a rehearsal room, and Scott Page walks in with a guy I had never seen before. And he said, hey guys, I want to introduce you to Bob Ezrin. I was like, Bob Ezrin? Isn't he like Pink Floyd's producer? Like, what's going on? And in
The
fact,
man who ruined
was.
Fish.
And so, like, he's like, hey, yeah, he's going to work with you a little while and, you know, see what you got going and maybe polish some stuff, whatever. So, of course, we were kind of blown away, but had an amazing time working with him. The next day that we were supposed to be rehearsing and getting ready for this show, the first thing that Scott did was he came in with these guys from a company called Wildfire, I think. It's a company that created a proprietary technology with paint, so that when the paint itself is processed, that paint glows like neon. The first time that it was used, as I understand it, is in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. There's some scene or scenes in there with glowing paint, and that was the first time out. So we got fitted for bodysuits, and the idea was that they were going to paint all over the bodysuits, so that when we did our cyber band, you know, performance, we would be glowing. So we got fitted for that. Okay, we're done with that. The next thing we know, Scott comes back with a guy who looked vaguely familiar, but I didn't know who he was. He goes, hey, I heard you had a great session with Bob yesterday. I want to introduce you to Alan. And Alan, who engineered the Beatles. Anyone? No?
No.
The Alan Parsons Project. So it was
Alan
Parsons
Parsons,
working with
right.
us for that day. Also, the guy who did Lawnmower Man.
Oh, I love that movie.
I'm forgetting his name, unfortunately. But he was there as well, documenting the whole thing. Not only us, but the entire event.
Right.
So we've now had 2 like stunning days of rehearsals with these legends, and we're ready to do our set the next day. And I should mention that when we locked this show and I had the band together, I knew that a friend of mine was pretty good friends with Les Paul. And so he got me Les's contact information, and I reached out to him and I introduced myself. And I said, you know, first of all, thank you for everything you've done for everyone who appreciates electric music and music in general. I said, but, you know, I've got this event coming up in Las Vegas, and we've created what's called a cyber band. And since you're the guy who invented the electric guitar, essentially, and a lot of other things that continue to this day to benefit us, I'm wondering, since it never hurts to ask, might you be willing? And I did this because I knew that he had a regular Monday night gig at a local club where he lived on the East Coast, and that his son was at every gig videotaping those gigs. And so I asked him, I said, Les, if it's not too much to ask, might you be willing to perhaps video an introduction of the band so that we can play it before we play, you know? And he did graciously, and he sent me this video of him introducing the band, which I then gave to Scott, and I kind of forgot about it. So now, fast forward, we're getting on stage to do our set. And for the first time in the entire event, because we came on maybe 45 minutes or so after the show started, but for the first time during that event, all the house lights went out. And there's the video screen with Les Paul saying, hi, I'm Les Paul. I invented the electric guitar. I want to tell you about this great band. Or, you know what? I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was a lovely introduction. And he said, you know, please welcome. And our band, we called it Triber, Tryber, Triber. So at the end of it, instead of that, he said, ladies and gentlemen, the Tribe. I was like, okay, no big deal. So we break into our thing. The lights are still down. We're glowing. You know, the whole thing went exactly as it was supposed to do. We had a great set. And toward the end of the show, they had a jam session. And they're like, hey, do you want to join the jam session? I was like, you know, do you really have to ask? So, so we jammed. And in that jam session were like some of the most amazing musicians, you know, legends, including Skunk Baxter. And we had a chance to chat for quite a while afterward. And it was, for me, as somebody who's a, you know, Steely Dan fan for a long time, and certainly some of the other stuff that he did, it was one of those kind of fanboy moments, as if the you know, jamming wasn't enough, just having a chance to sort of pick his brain. And I've had so many of those kinds of experiences over the decades. I've learned never to take anything for granted, and so that was my one and only time actually playing, you know, making music with Jeff Skunk Baxter.
But he doesn't really play much, does he? Is he touring with
Steely? Not so much, although from time to time I see
Brothers are touring, but it's not him.
No, I don't think it's him.
No, he's like a nuclear physicist, right? Isn't he? Like,
yeah, he's a very, very smart.
That story is fascinating, though. That whole like being ahead of technology at that time, and what you're like trying to do is, I love those kind of things, and we're gonna kind of segue into what we were talking about backstage before, the production side of things and how that kind of led you to where you are. Because these stories are fascinating. The people you've met, the connections you've made, and how it's led you into these things. And just that story alone, the people that were involved in that whole project is fascinating. And what you guys were like putting together and doing that's awesome. And at that time, I love those kind of creative things where you're like, I don't know what this means to do, but let's try it and let's just do it. And that way there's not really any wrong way to do it because no one's done it before. You're breaking total new ground. And those are the best times. Like that's really where art gets to like really, you know, and doing the like that's fascinating to me. That was really
was
cool.
It recorded?
Yes. And as a matter of fact, last year, because I've gone on to produce the annual Cafe Istanbul Night Fest that happens at a great club, Cafe Istanbul, during Jazzfest every year in New Orleans.
Frenchman Street.
What's that?
Frenchman Street, right?
Well, it's not on Frenchman Street. It's not too far from Frenchman Street, but it's actually on St. Claude. It was, in fact, recorded. And last year, that's what I was starting to say, I booked Scott Page and his band, which is basically, you know, guys from Fishbone and Jane's Addiction and, you know, heavy hitters. Mm-hmm. And Scott told me last year that video that was shot that night is now on the moon. There was a satellite that went up, and the goal was to leave a record of, and I apologize because I don't have all the details yet, but he made a point of telling me, hey, we're on the moon. So I don't know exactly what that means, but I do know that it was recorded.
And it's on the moon now.
How does it feel to be on the moon?
At least part of it. So if anybody finds it one day, maybe they'll go, oh,
that's crazy.
Scott Baxter.
I love it.
So yeah, that's, you know, I record all of the shows that I produce to the best of my ability with video and with audio. And I do that in New Orleans, you know, during Jazz Fest. So I'm building up a nice library of some amazing shows.
I love that. I do. We're gonna go off here, but that's what I do. I do it for this band, Taper's Choice, out here. I video all their shows now, record them, we throw them up on our YouTube channel and stuff. But I love it. I love recording live music, and with the streaming now, I love like when we can do live streams and streaming it out and directing the streams and stuff. And I think it's such a great record. I look at it because like Kevin and I are both huge Deadheads from the day and traded tapes and did that whole trade tape. I look at it kind of as that next evolution in the phase of, hey, it's a great way for young bands to get out there because you can, you know, social media and have videos and let people see you perform as just hearing you. And I think it's such a good thing to like have a video record these days of shows and things that you do. So that's fascinating. And I know you come from kind of the video production world, and we can kind of get into talking about how you sort of got your start and how that led you to where you were. So
sure. Well, going way back, I grew up in a little town called Glencoe, just north of Chicago. And during the time I was in junior high school and high school, most of John Hughes films were shot around there.
Right. Yeah.
Chris Columbus. And so I went to the sets of films like Risky Business and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and 16 Candles. And I would spend hours on the set just watching.
Molly.
Being amazed at how there's 100 people around these two actors, and it's just dead silence, and I was fascinated by it. So when I got to college at Syracuse, I originally went in as a music major because that was my path. I was going to be a professional musician. But through a series of events too detailed to go into here, I ended up discovering and taking classes at the Newhouse School of Communications, which is one of the top communication schools in the country. And I pretty quickly changed my focus into film, television, and audio production. And that became my path. So when I left Syracuse, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to move to LA and be a film producer. That was my goal. So I did that. I moved to LA, and just a couple of months later, I just back in for a minute. I too, for those who haven't heard of my particular thing, I'm a ginormous deadhead. I saw my first show in 1978, before you guys were born, maybe? I'm not sure.
I was 7.
6, 8. Yeah.
And what happened was my friend Billy called me up and he said, "Hey, I have an extra ticket to a rock show. Do you want to go?" And I said, "Who is it?" And he said, "The Grateful Dead." I had never heard of the Grateful Dead. But not too long before that, I had been to one of my very first concerts, which was Kiss in their heyday in 77, I guess.
Nice.
And so based on that, he said, "Oh, it's the Grateful Dead." And in my mind, I'm thinking, Grateful Dead!
Just like Kiss, it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be there's lots of pyro and blood everywhere. It's going to be great. And so I get there and I had 8th row center seats and I'm waiting for the show to begin and I'm not seeing any flash pots or anything like that. And all of a sudden these long-haired hippies kind of ramble on stage and kind of take their positions and I'm like, what the hell?
Don't say a word.
Noodle around with the instruments for a bit.
I had no idea. And then they proceeded to change my life. In that very first concert, they played, 3.5 hours. My first show was January 30th of 1978, which I think might have been the first time they played there. I think.
Right.
At the end of the show, as I said, my life was changed. I walked outside where everybody's mingling and talking about how great the show was. And there's this guy who holds up a ticket. I have an extra for tomorrow. And I lunged for it. And I was like, I want to see this show again. And so I went the next night expecting to see the same show, of course, because most bands play the same show night after night. And there wasn't a single repeated song. And I was like, and it was still at such a high level. I was buzzing when I got out of there. And that set me on the path. So touching on the topic that you mentioned about tape trading, the Dead were unique in that they allowed their fans to record their shows. And the one thing they said was, we will certainly let you record our show because when we're done with it, you can have it, but just don't sell it. Don't charge anybody for it. That was the smartest thing they could have ever done. Because that,
Marketing
as we all
101.
resulted in their incredible worldwide at this point popularity. And
the first hit's free. The first hit's free, but then you got to pay.
Kind of. And so now, and I'm sorry to jump around, but it just reminded me that I created an app called Dead Shows, which is basically for deadheads who know about Dead Bass, which is the encyclopedia of all things Grateful Dead concerts with all the stats and everything. I wanted to create a handheld version of that. I've now done it. And one of the greatest things about it is that you can search for any of the 2,000 plus concerts that they played, get the set list for that, find the details of every song on the set list, and assuming you have internet access, and assuming the recording exists, you can start streaming that show. So this takes, tape trading takes the tapes out of it. It just, as long as you have internet access, you can do that. So I'm aware of sort of the evolution of the tapers and those who have benefited from their excellent work.
Yes, and how it turned into streaming these days, like kind of that natural progression to it becoming everything out there. And now it's so great because you can go on all these different apps and find all the shows, that and even videos of it now too exist on YouTube and stuff. So it's
absolutely. And you asked me kind of how my journey started, and I just wanted to sort of lay the context of the fact that I am a pretty rabid Deadhead. I ended up seeing almost 400 Grateful Dead shows, plus another 300 or so Jerry Garcia shows.
Awesome.
Jerry Garcia and John Kahn, Bobby and the Midnights, etc. So this is something that at this point is very much in my DNA level. And so back to the show that I saw, Ranch Rock. All I knew was that Bob Weir and Mickey Hart were going to be in it, and I think John Cipollina was also billed. Kingfish.
Yeah.
And so I went from my home in LA. I got in my car and I drove the several hours to Pyramid Lake, Nevada, where I was, driving for a long, long, long time in nothing but desert, as far as the eye can see. And
you think you've gone far enough, going a little further.
And then I turned the corner, and there is as far as the eye can see, this crystal blue lake in the middle of nowhere. So I get up to the stage area. They set up a temporary stage at the edge of the lake. It was like 100 degrees. People were skinny dipping all over the place. And at the beginning of the show, an Indian chief in full regalia got up on stage and asked everyone to kind of, be silent and kind of bow your heads. And he recited an incantation over the proceedings. And I was like, what is this? And so I went to the production office to find out. I said, what is this all about? And they informed me that this was to raise money for I believe it was Paiute Indians. That was their land, and they made their living off of fishing charters and being guides for people who came onto the land. And our government was trying to take it away from them. And I'm like, we're almost at the end of the 20th century. Why is this still going on? And it really bothered me so much that I went to the woman who I had met in the production office, and I said, this might be a weird request, but I was so upset by learning about this. I'm wondering if the tribe might be interested in having me produce a documentary about their plight. Because again, I'm a young, hungry filmmaker wannabe, and it just kind of made sense. And she said, oh, I'm sure they would appreciate that a lot. So she introduced me to the tribe, to the elders, and I pitched them on the idea, and they were so appreciative. And so I was, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks or so into it when they won, after 10 or 11 years of fighting, or however long it was. It was great news, of course, for everyone involved. And it also kind of left me without a documentary. I didn't, at that point, the drive, the motivation for doing it, I'm sure it would make a great all-encompassing, here's the story of what happened. But that wasn't the thing that was driving me, but that's okay.
Well, you suddenly got your happy ending that you weren't really looking for in it, right? You were like, well, it's great for you guys, but that's not really how I wanted to do it.
That's okay. That's okay. But as a result of that, the woman who was my contact reached out to me, and she said, I know this is kind of out of the blue, but, because of what you were doing with the Paiutes, I had mentioned that to Bill Graham, and he wants to know if you want to come up to the Bay Area to produce a project for him. And I was like, being at the Deadhead, knowing who Bill Graham is, I'm like, of course. So she got him on the phone. It was not on that call, but she got me on the phone with Bill. And he gave me the overview of what he wanted to do. And he explained that he had created an organization in conjunction with the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, and they were calling it Rock Medicine, otherwise known as Rock Med. And he created it, and the doctors agreed to donate their services to provide non-punitive, non-judgmental healthcare at his concerts. Because before then, if one were to go to one of his concerts and take too much of whatever and have a bad trip or whatever,
You could get arrested.
they're led away in handcuffs.
Right.
Which, if you're having a bad trip, that's the last thing that should be
That's
happening.
not what you need.
Yeah.
So they came up with this brilliant idea to create a safe space backstage with subdued lighting and quiet music and medical staff on hand to help people who have taken a little too much of whatever. And they also have, full-blown medical facilities for anyone who had a serious problem. And I thought, man, that is, and so Bill wanted to create this documentary and send it to promoters all over the country as a model of like, hey, you guys should be doing this. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity and great project. And so the deal that he offered me was he was going to set me up with an apartment in San Francisco temporarily, because I was living in LA, for 3 months. He was going to pay me 3 months salary for me to do this production for him. And so I came up to LA, came up from LA to the Bay Area, got into the apartment that Bill had set up for me and started pre-production. And again, we were about, 2 to 3 weeks about 2 weeks into it when Bill called me and he said, hey, I'm sorry to say this, but a couple of my really big shows just canceled, and the money that I had kind of earmarked for the production of this has to be put elsewhere. So I'm really sorry. So I went to his office, South of Market, with the 2.5 months salary that he had prepaid me. And I gave it to him and I said, Bill, here's the remainder of the salary. You let me know when you're ready to pick this up again and I'll come right back up. He wouldn't take the money back. And I said, Bill, I don't feel good taking payment for a job that I haven't done. At which point he said, look, the fact that my show's canceled and I have to change things here has nothing to do with my commitment to you. So enjoy the Bay Area. So thanks to Bill Graham, directly, personally, solely, I had a 2.5 month paid vacation, essentially, to explore the Bay Area. Now, I came to the Bay Area temporarily as a film producer, knowing that I needed to be in LA to be a film producer, or so I thought. But while I was in the Bay Area, I actually explored and discovered that the Bay Area is a thriving independent film community, from Saul Zahn's Film Center to Coppola to,
ILM and George Lucas and everything's up there.
I was going to say George Lucas, but I will say George Lucas is an independent filmmaker. And I just fell in love with the area. And one of the things that really struck me, and I'm speaking as a compassionate atheist, I really, focus my waking hours on what is in front of me and the things that are really important. And I have very little time for metaphysical stuff that is alleged. Does that make sense? I'm not begrudging anyone who is religious. That's not my point here. My point is that because I don't really subscribe to that supernatural aspect of things, I was driving through San Rafael, California for the very first time during that paid vacation. I had not been to San Rafael before. I didn't know anything about it. All I knew about San Rafael was that as a deadhead, when I wanted to mail away for tickets to Grateful Dead concerts, which was the only way to do it prior to the internet,
2 index cards
box was in San Rafael, California. That's all I knew.
Yep.
2 separate money orders.
What's that?
2 separate money orders. One for the postage and one for the
3x5 index card.
Yep. Decorate the envelope, color it nice.
And only postal money orders, nothing. Anyway, wonderful nostalgia. Thank you.
Yes.
So I'm in San Rafael for the very first time, and I'm driving, and I stop at a red light, and I look to my right, and there's a house. It's like any other house. And in my mind, in that moment, I said, that's the Grateful Dead office. There was no signage. There was no cars with stickers. I just, for whatever reason, I looked at it, and in fact, that was the Grateful Dead office. So to this day, I can't really explain it away, but I'm happy about it. I'm happy that happened. So it's, thanks to Bill, even though I planned on spending the rest of my life in Los Angeles, couple months later, I moved up to the Bay Area, and I've been here ever since.
That's fascinating. That, I mean, it's crazy that, you know, one thing could change your life and that kind of stuff. But the fact that it's Bill Graham is just like, that's so crazy. Like, that's so cool. And the fact that, like, it's the way it started too, with, you know, doing the other documentary and then him contacting you and doing, and like, that's what a crazy story to get you up there and to start all of that.
Well,
So,
you know, it only underscores one of my most often used life mottos: it never hurts to ask.
yeah. Kev is that's how Kev does it too with everything. He's very much on that same boat. It's so funny you say that, because he says that all the time. He's like, the worst they're going to say is no.
I sold real estate for years. That's where I learned it.
Got it. Well, certainly, you know, being in the Bay Area led directly to my involvement with the Grateful Dead and the extended family, and, you know, to what
you were always playing music though, right? Through all
no,
this,
I was always playing music. I've been playing piano since I was 4. I classically trained. I took in fact, you know what? I'll tell you right now. I'll tell you a story that I told Phil Lesh when I was having dinner with him before one of the bar shows that we were playing at Terrapin Crossroads. And I told him the following story, and that is when I took purely classical lessons, piano lessons, from 4 to 14. And the last 3 years or so, I was working with a world-class pianist named Emilio Del Rosario. And we were working with all, you know, Mozart and Bach and Chopin. And, but this was when I was right around the time when I saw my first Dead show. And it was also right around the time when I started to feel as though the music that I was playing, although correct, it had to be correct. It had to be note for note. And if it wasn't, it's wrong. That's it. Well, I'm in my lesson one day in my 10th year of classical lessons, my 3rd year with Emilio Del Rosario, and I'm playing a Chopin piece. And in the middle of it, I added a grace note, little blink. He stopped me. What was that? And I said to him, I think it sounds better that way. At which point, he, after 3+ years of working with me, said, we are done. I will not work with someone who thinks that they can improve upon Chopin. I told that story to Phil, who cracked up. Now, fast forward, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't take anything for granted. I'm so appreciative of every opportunity. But being a Deadhead, having the opportunity to not only interact, you know, in a conversation, but make music with my heroes, essentially, is beyond anything that I can really put into words. So I played several shows in the bar with Phil and other folks, and that was, you know, amazing, incredible life opportunities and experiences. And then one day, I get an email saying from Phil's management saying Phil would like you to play with him in the Great Room for one of his shows. I'm like, oh, because that's, you know, that's an elevation that goes from the bar
tier 2, tier 3 to tier 2, right?
Yeah. And it was with Stu Allen, with whom I've been playing for more than
Mars Hotel.
Fantastic. Well, Mars Hotel, and he's also was our main key guitarist in my band Cryptical. And so most of the shows that Cryptical played, Stu was the lead guitarist.
Well, was it the two of you with Joan Osborne down at Jazzfest? Were you part of that thing?
That was the first time that I think that was the first year that I played with Joan. And Stu was on that gig, and it was Robin Sylvester and Jay Lane and Rob Eaton and who am I missing? I think Wally Ingram.
Yeah,
it might have been Jason Hand. I'd have to look at that.
The beauty of streaming. It's the beauty of streaming that I got to sit here in Baltimore and watch it.
That's right.
Well, if you go to Vimeo, you can check out both that lineup with Joan. We're doing Birdsong. So Vimeo, Vimeo.com, search for Axial Tilt Birdsong. You'll see a really nice version of that. That was one of the only shows that we did outside of New Orleans. That was in Chicago.
Is that what it was billed as? Was Axial Tilt?
Yeah. So beginning in 2015, I had been going, so yeah, let me, if I may, I'm just trying to keep this as chronological.
No, go ahead. Wherever you gotta go, we'll go with you.
Yeah.
But it was right around the time that that Emilio, my piano instructor, fired me for adding a grace note. That I just felt like I was missing something in my playing. I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I heard Chick Corea. And as soon as I heard Chick Corea play the piano, I knew that's what I needed to be doing. Because here's somebody who in his playing is so classically oriented in the technique, but he had his completely original voice. And that flipped a switch in me. I was like, I want to pursue that. So I started taking formal jazz lessons. I ended up doing that immersive session at Berklee. And I really focused on the jazz aspect of it and did for many, many, many years. And so when I learned about Jazzfest 30 plus years ago, I started going every year as a musician. And I would spend every single night going from venue to venue, introducing myself, and in many cases being able to sit in with a lot of these musicians. So I built up my base of friends and the network and everything else, so that in 2015, I was going to be headed to Jazzfest again, as I was doing every year. But I had this crazy idea to produce a 2-night celebration of the Grateful Dead's 50th anniversary. And I didn't even have a name for it at that point. I just knew that I wanted to do this. And so I started reaching out to every venue that I knew, where I had played, where I hadn't played, but every venue in New Orleans, that I knew about. And I reached out to them and I introduced myself and I said, hey, I'm looking to do this thing and I'm looking for a Friday and a Saturday. And every single one of them just laughed in my face because I was so late in the game that they were like, man, we've been booked for months and you're coming to us cold calling, asking for both a Friday and a Saturday in the middle of Jazzfest. I don't know who you are, but you're crazy. They didn't say that, but that was the message, right? In a friendly way. Nobody got, ugly about it. So after I'd done that with pretty much every venue that I could think of, I resigned myself to the fact, I tried. And then a buddy of mine said, hey, have you called Cafe Istanbul? And I said, I haven't even heard of Cafe Istanbul. And he said, I think it might be really good for what you're trying to do. So I tracked down the owner of Cafe Istanbul and I called him and I introduced myself and I pitched him on it. And he too kind of laughed. He's like, we've been booked for months and you want a Friday and a Saturday. And he said, but let's talk next year and a little earlier in the game and maybe we can set something up. And I thanked him and I hung up and I was like, oh, well, I tried it. Next year isn't the 50th anniversary, so it's not quite the same thing. Right. 5 minutes later, the phone rings. I answer, and it's the owner of Cafe Istanbul. And he says, I don't know you from Adam, but there's something about that pitch that you just gave me that is making me want to roll the dice. So I'm going to shift my Friday and Saturday around. I'm going to give you the Friday and Saturday, and we'll see how you do. And so I got Stu Allen and Rob Eaton and Robin Sylvester and Jay Lane and Donna Jean Godshaw and Charles Neville brothers, with whom I become brothers years earlier, the Bone Rama Horns. And we did this 2-night Axial Tilt celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Grateful Dead. And at the end of it, the owner of Cafe Istanbul said, hey, how would you like to book this club every year during Jazzfest? At which point I said, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I would. One of the things I didn't mention was that when I was in college, I was head of the, the University Union Concert Board at Syracuse University. And we had a muscular dystrophy dance marathon coming up. And the job was to hire a band that would keep people dancing for hours. Well, at that point, because of my deadheadism, I had become aware of and really started to really love the Neville Brothers. And so I pitched it. I said, we should hire the Neville Brothers. And everyone was like, who the hell are the Neville Brothers? We want a band that people know.
Oh, you know the Neville Brothers.
Dancing. And it was like pulling teeth. They were so against it. And I just would not give in. And I said, look, you want people to dance. This band will keep them dancing for hours. You have to trust me on this. Finally, they're like, okay, but if it goes south, it's on you. And okay, no problem. So I I booked the band. I have a funny side story if we have time. Do we have time for me to just? Okay. So I booked the band, and in the rider, it says, have a catered chicken dinner to be served after sound check. So I arranged with a local restaurant to have everything catered, beautiful roasted chicken. I'm served on china with glassware and actual silverware. So they finished their sound check. They went to eat. And about 5 minutes later, Art Neville comes to find me. Art is the keyboardist. And he says, hey man, you got any chicken wings around here? And I said, well, yeah. And in fact, there's a restaurant in Syracuse and elsewhere called Sal's Birdland, SAL''S, which are to this day my favorite chicken wings of all time. They're not buffalo wings, but they're battered with a proprietary batter. And I sent a runner out to get a box of 30 wings. And for takeout for them, they sent their wings in pizza boxes. So he came back with a pizza box filled with 30 wings. And I don't know, about 10 minutes later, here comes Art Neville looking for me. Hey man, you got any more of those wings? So at this point, I sent the runner out to get a box of 60 wings because I didn't want to send him out again. So he comes back with a box of 60 wings, and I went to do what I needed to do, and I came back, and sure enough, he hadn't eaten the entire box, but he made a huge dent and had eaten more than half of it. Well, at the end of that extremely successful show, of course, the band kept everybody dancing for hours. The Nevilles were so appreciative, they invited me to their show the following weekend in Manhattan, which I don't know, 4.5 hour drive away, and of course I went. And I brought Art an extra large Sal's Birdland t-shirt, gave it to him before the show, and he wore it for the entire show. So if you ever see a picture of Art Neville wearing an orange Sal's Birdland t-shirt, now you know where it came from.
That's it. That's amazing. That's awesome.
And as a result of that, fast forward years after that, and I'm in New Orleans, one of the first years that I was going as a musician, and I see that the Charles Neville Quartet is playing at Storyville. So I'm like, I'm going to go watch Charles do his thing and maybe say hi. So I went to Storyville. They were in the middle of their set, finished the set. I went up to Charles at the half, and I extended my hand. I said, Charles, I don't know if you remember me or not, and he goes, Mitch! And he like embraces me. And from that moment, he just basically welcomed me into his family and into New Orleans in general. And so it was that relationship that led to my inviting him, and him graciously and eagerly saying, yes, I'll play in that Axial Tilt thing. I know there was a roundabout way to get there, but sometimes the backstories are important for context. But I've been very, very fortunate in that way in New Orleans and here in the Bay Area and elsewhere to be surrounded by people who appreciate music. Their lives are centered around music. And I find that the majority of those people are also the kind of sympathetic, empathetic, compassionate kind of people with whom I want to surround myself, especially these days.
Yeah, right.
So I know there was a lot of me just going on, so I don't know if I'm taking this off.
So who, you do that in New Orleans. I know that you had something set up, and then this other band announced they were doing shows in the same city as you. You had to rearrange a little bit, but you're still playing shows for the 60th anniversary now, 10 years later.
Well, in fact, that's a good segue, because for the last couple of years, I've also in New Orleans booked Melvin Seals and JGB and had some amazing shows with them, and it's turned into a real nice little residency for them. And so I had this idea toward the end of last year to produce a 3-night celebration of the Dead's 60th anniversary. And I reached out to the Great American to pitch them on the idea. They were open to it. I reached out to JGB. They were open to it. And I said, let's do an Axial Tilt. Usually we do a 2-night Axial Tilt, but this time around we're going to do Melvin and JGB on Friday and Saturday, and a one-night Axial Tilt on Sunday. Now, the JGB shows were originally set to start at 9 p.m. Axial Tilt was originally set to start at 6 p.m. It's a 5-hour show, Axial Tilt. Right. We do one acoustic set and then 2 full-length electric sets with breaks in between, but it's a 5-hour show. And it was originally set to start at 6 and end at 11 because it's a Sunday night. It's a, it's a school night. And then this other band announced that they were going to be coming to town in the same nights. And it kind of stirred things up. In fact, we had some folks who had purchased tickets mainly for Axial Tilt, because that was the one that was starting earlier, and they were reaching out going, hey, we want to get a refund because we want to go to this other band.
This other band.
And I realized that once that other band announced their performance times, people who would want to come to Axial Tilt would say, and did say, well, there's no point because, by the time we get out of that other show and make our way to the Great American, it'll be over. So I reached out to everybody involved and I said, hey, how would you feel about shifting the start time? So that's what we did. So now the JGB shows are starting at 10 p.m. Axial Tilt will, instead of starting at 6 p.m., will start at 9 p.m. with the acoustic set. And so we'll be going to 2 a.m. So as far as an after party for that other band, it's tough to think of a better one, but I can't be purely objective about it. But the Axial Tilt lineup will be Joan Osborne, John Kadlasic from Melvin Seals and JGB. We've got Nate LaPointe on rhythm guitar from Cubensis and so many other things. Stephen Ramirez from the Zen Tricksters and Cryptical on bass. Pete Lavazzoli from Jazz is Dead and Live Dead, I think, is another one that he's touring with. On drums, he was one of Cryptical's earliest drummers before he moved away. So it's going to be really, he played his first Axial Tilt this year in New Orleans. So the opportunity to do 2 of these with Pete is great. Plus the great.
He used to be in a band called Crazy Fingers.
Yes.
That played down in Florida. Yeah,
and they're a fun band.
Yes, they are a fun band.
It's crazy, these the incestuous nature of the Grateful Dead tribute community. And also Wally Ingram will be joining us on percussion, and we'll have some surprises, including, I can announce here. Should I announce here?
Yes, you should announce here.
Sure. Legendary Grateful Dead recordist producer Betty Cantor Jackson will be recording all of those shows. So really excited about that. We are currently talking with folks about a live stream, and if we can get that done, then she would essentially be providing the audio for that live stream. So it could be pretty cool if the planets align.
So how does it feel to know that you're going to have your very own Betty board?
Well, let me tell you something. Betty was one of the first people I met when I moved to the Bay Area, just coincidentally. And we became the fastest friends immediately and have been ever since. And she's one of my all-time favorite people. She's truly a living legend. And I would say that even if I wasn't a Deadhead, because she doesn't only work with the Grateful Dead, she works with a lot of other people. And has been responsible. And in fact, I don't want to tell the story on her behalf, but I will hint at the fact that she was in some way involved with George Harrison and All Things Must Pass. But, in the Grateful Dead world, she is one of these incredible, I use the term living legend. I don't use that lightly. Because
legendary name, though, everybody knows what a Betty board is, whether you know who exactly they're talking about. You've heard the term before.
Of course.
If it's appropriate here, Betty has and she's aware of this. There's nothing going on that she doesn't know about. But she had some issues when the floodings happened She had her house was flooded out. She's had some issues, and I began a GoFundMe for her, which has currently raised a little over $9,000 for her. And I would encourage anyone who knows Betty, who cares about Betty, to go to GoFundMe, search for Betty Cantor Jackson, and let her know how much she means to you.
Right.
I hope it's okay that I said that.
Yeah,
No,
no,
it's fine.
definitely.
No, make your pitch, man. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, and actually, I mean,
want.
we can put a link to the GoFundMe in the
Yeah.
description below
Great.
too, for
I
people to be
appreciate
able
that.
to click below and go right to it from here. So yeah, we'll put that down there. So if, yeah, click the
Now,
link below and go donate.
can I buy a 3-day pass? Am I just buying single?
No, we don't. There aren't any. I'm glad you asked, and we had talked about that, but we made the decision early on just to keep each show separate. When I produce shows in New Orleans, I offer multi-day passes.
Right.
But for this particular one, it just didn't make a lot of sense. And in hindsight, I'm kind of glad we didn't because of that other band that showed up. So,
right. And it's
hindsight
easier
is
to
always
get people to
20/20.
come. Right. It's easier to get someone to show up one night for
Well, there's
these
that.
kind of things at
There's
that
that.
point.
Yeah.
Definitely. Sunday's a tough call. That's like for the champions, the people who are there at 2 a.m. on Sundays.
Well, yeah, that's true. And but then again, all we have is this one life. You only go through it once. You got to have the opportunity.
Enjoy it. That's right.
Wait a minute. Who's the opening band on Sunday, T?
There is no opening band. It's
no, for the other band. Who's the opening band for the other band on
I
Sunday?
think it's Trey.
Right. Would there be somebody with the initials TA showing up, maybe?
I can neither confirm or deny anything like that. How dare you?
That would be hot. That would be hot.
That's awesome. It's kind of, I mean, it's kind of nice that it worked out that way. I know we probably threw a monkey wrench in your plans. You're like, oh crap, like now we gotta, but it's pretty sweet that now you have the after shows, like you have this huge influx of people coming in to now really do it. So, and it gives us something to do for, I mean, I'm probably going to go up for it. So I may stop by.
Well, great. I will say that both JGB shows are completely sold out.
Nice.
Axial Tilt is about 3/4 sold out. And I think the only reason for it not being sold out is most of the tickets that were sold before that other band announced the thing. And so people were like, understandably, oh, it doesn't start till 9 on a Sunday night. 5 hours. I mean, at 6 o'clock, starts at 6 and then 11 o'clock. I'm guessing that that's the reason for it, because I have no doubt that this will sell out before.
Right. Yeah.
For sure.
But, it's the satisfaction that comes for me personally. And I know for the other members of the event have expressed it to me as well, but the opportunity to perform Grateful Dead music the way that I've intended, which is for Axial Tilt to essentially be right around 95% all Grateful Dead originals. Mm-hmm. And when we do a 2-night Axial Tilt and we don't repeat songs from one night to the next, obviously that's a great palette. Mm-hmm. And so I mentally try every time we have an Axial Tilt, which is on an annual basis, to look back at the last Axial Tilt, maybe the one before that. So when I compile the set list, we're not repeating songs from those either, because now we have repeat attendees who come to Axial Tilt every year. Mm-hmm. And I want to be conscious of giving them something new every time to the best of my ability.
Do you have a spreadsheet?
I don't really use a spreadsheet as much as I use a Microsoft Word document. And I have
it's a running joke that I have spreadsheets like Fish is starting their tour. I have started a spreadsheet. I will be tracking what they play.
It's a spreadsheet without the cells.
There you go.
There you go.
That's your answer.
So, for this one,
we talked to Jeff Mattson once from Dark Star Orchestra, and he was talking about how they have years worth of data, and they don't want to repeat a year, or an error, even if they come to a town year to year and things like that.
Yeah,
and it was just boggled my mind. And like Matt Bush, we've had Matt Bush on just talking about doing set lists for Dead and Company and just the incredible amount of work that went into it.
Goes into it, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. that's one of the things that I really, for me, it's kind of a personal little treat to be able to compile the set list and, you know, put forth what I as a deadhead would want to see.
Right.
And then I, you know, send it out to the folks in that particular lineup for feedback. If there's anything that I've proposed that they specifically don't want to do, or there's one that I missed that they definitely want to do, I try to make it democratic, you know, once I put out the first list. And everybody who's, you know, Jeff Mattson, you know, has played Axial Tilt before. We tried to, you know, and Lisa has sung with us on several occasions. Lisa from DSO. You know, I really, my focus is on trying to have as members of whatever Axial Tilt is happening, to try to be the, you know, the real top players in that particular position. And I know it's a subjective thing. I know it is. But and I have relationships with these people that go back years or decades. And so I feel very fortunate to kind of have these incredibly talented people, not only in my circle of friends, but
you have a huge pool to pull from, though. Like you were saying, it's so incestuous, but you really do have a huge pool of people you can pull from.
Well, again, I try to do everything Grateful Dead related from the standpoint of a deadhead. You know, what would I want to see? Who would I want to see? What, you know, what kind of set would I want to do? Like, one of the things that I love about Axial Tilt is that in the set list, I try to include songs in the first acoustic set that are traditionally performed electric.
Right.
So, like this last time around, we did Easy Wind, and Pete Lavzoli is a phenomenal Pigpen recreator. His voice is so much like Pig's, it's scary. And so we did an acoustic version of Easy Wind that it just made my heart swell. It was
very nice. It was really, very nice.
Yeah, memorable. So yeah, that's, you know, that I take every day as it comes. I try to make the most of every day. And as regards, you know, these shows coming up at the Great American Music Hall, I mean, the Great American is my all-time favorite indoor venue. And before I ever got involved with, you know, producing formally in New Orleans and elsewhere, I went to more shows at the Great American than I can possibly count, including some amazing Radiators shows, which was what led to my, you know, becoming friends with the guys in the band and now having a band with Dave, Camille, and Reggie from the Radiators. We have a band called Gatorators, and we had our debut at Jazzfest in 2012. And we've played a whole bunch of times since.
I drove up from Baltimore all the way to the Brooklyn Bowl, saw you guys play, and turned around and drove back home. 9 hours on the road to see you guys play for 2 hours.
Well, you know, it's been a treat to play with them, not only in this neck of the woods. I mean, we played some really fun shows at the Sweetwater, where Bobby joined us for several tunes, and I gotta silence my phone. And we sold out a couple of nights at Terrapin Crossroads, and we just really enjoy playing together. And the shows that we've played in New Orleans are especially special for me. You know, to be playing that music that I love with the guys who made it. Again, I can't really. It's why I do what I do, is for those moments, because in between those moments, it's just a hell of a lot of work. I joke that I'm surprisingly masochistic. I never thought of myself that way, but as a one-man band, as a promoter, you know, you're lauded and you're criticized, and it just comes with the territory. And you know, thankfully, I have a pretty good track record at this point. And this last year was my 10th year producing. This year, I should say, was the 10th anniversary of Axial Tilt, because the first one was in 2015. We were obviously dark for 2020 and 2021, but I still consider it our 10th anniversary. So, you know, there's so many reasons to celebrate, and the opportunity to do so in my favorite venue with some of my favorite people, with the music of our generation and our community, is something that I relish. And I'm so appreciative, not only to the musicians who are giving of their time, but the folks at the Great American Music Hall. They were rolling the dice as well.
Yeah.
Did they stream from there?
So, well, we hope to.
That's what he's saying.
That's what we're working on right now. It's not a done deal yet, but just be assured I'm wanting it to be.
Right.
So, go ahead.
There's a great platform called volume.com that do actually free live streams, and then they asked people can tip the band kind of thing. They normally do bars, but I really like their platform as opposed to a subscription service where you're, I think of them more like mercenaries, maybe. I don't know. I'll
put on my producer hat for a moment. To put together a multi-camera pro video crew with a live switcher, and to get the audio mixed and to that stream that is being switched live, and then to send it out, it's not a cheap proposition. And so, we could stream for free on YouTube or whatever.
Single camera. I think what Volume does, they have 3 cameras set up, and the feed is fed to someone else who probably has 2 or 3 shows at once going on, and they switch it from a remote location.
I don't know that would be for me as a film producer and as somebody who's been doing this for years. I don't know that I would be comfortable limiting myself.
This is me and T when I want to do stuff. I want to do stuff like shorts, and T's like, "Wait, no, we have to make."
Exactly.
I encourage them, and I'm happy to know that there are other folks out there doing this, and for the right reasons, i.e., for free to share the music. I totally support that, and that's why I had to put on that hat to explain that. I have to. Production
value.
No, and I'll tell you, from shooting it the way I shoot it, a lot too, is it's you need, because I'm so limited. I usually have maybe one other person with me who's shooting with their phone, but they're a fan, and then I use my phone as a mobile, and then I lock off like the Cinema 6K somewhere, but that's a lock off shot, and so it's really hard and then I'll work their merch table too, so like I'm not even like manning the cameras, so to speak, during some of the show and then filming. And then when you go home to edit or put it all into post, you start looking at it and you're like, well, it's fun, but like you can't it's hard to get, like, I want those over the head keyboard shots, like I want to be in there with them and I want to be on stage. Like, so it kind of gives you that, it's cool, to kind of send like the main shot, but where's my cutaways and where's that, and then when you do go into some place that has the camera set up and multiple cameras to shoot from, it's such a more entertaining stream, and it's so much more fun to tell the story of the band on stage playing it from a director's point of view in the live stream, that kind of thing, and doing that. So I totally understand what you're saying from the production value point of view. It is hard, and it's just nice to see different platforms popping up though too. You know what I mean?
Like that's what I'm saying.
That's your point.
As long as they're doing it for the right reasons and with the end viewer in mind. I won't mention anyone by name, but a couple of years ago, there was a platform that was courting me. And I came to find out that they weren't who they said they were, and they were not operating in the kind of ethical way that I operate.
Right.
And so but there are always those kinds of folks as well who are looking to leech on to other people.
Right. You can also run a Mixler. All you have to do is have a microphone on stage to run to a Mixler and put it out there, and people can listen to the audio.
And I love doing that too.
Sometimes.
Yeah, and I'll do that at a lot of shows with like my third cell phone that I use just for that. And I think that's a great thing too. That reminds me a lot of like live taping, right? Where it's like kind of illegal and a little bit on the down, especially if it's a bigger show and you're trying not to get busted.
Most nights Dead and Company, the Sphere, somebody did it, and sometimes they get popped, and you can hear the security guards like talking to the people.
Yeah.
Or like just shut
as a beneficiary, if you will, of all of my taper friends back in the day. And I would get these cassettes of shows, and because they were all, for the most part, audience tapes, I hear all that stuff. A lot of the tapes, hey, put that away.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Great.
Those were the
I
days.
love it.
Exactly.
But
Is
now,
there
you know,
anything-
the ability to stream and to share digital files in an instant without having to set up your Nakamichi and the Sony D5s in our line, you know, with cables.
Are you as
running between them.
invested though with the instant gratification? Are you as invested as having to buy a 2-pack of tapes to tape a show and then have your buddy say, I also got this tape, and then having to make the choice of what 2 out of the 3 you were actually going to record?
And how about, let's go even more old school. How about the issue of having to flip the tape in the middle of a song?
Right.
And then,
Oh.
DAT came around, you know, the DAT revolution, DAT, digital audio tape. And when that came around, wow, that was an exponential jump because you didn't have to worry about flipping tapes anymore.
Yep.
Just hit record and you're done.
Unless you were taping the Rads and they played a 3-hour set.
Well, there's
So
that.
they screwed you anyway because you put a
There's
2-hour tape in instead of a 3-hour.
Yeah. Yep.
God help me. I've been there, done that. So what else do you have going on? Where else can people see you if they want, or do you have anything else?
Well,
any other things going
at
on?
the moment, I've been so busy with my film and video stuff that I haven't really been doing gigs out all that often. I also am not doing a ton of indoor gigs these days. I'm being very cautious because, not to get too personal, but my wife is immunocompromised, and as a result, I just don't take.
You don't want to bring bugs home.
Yeah,
You know?
makes sense. No, totally.
And it's really hurt my gigging ability, and it is a painful topic, and I'm really upset that you brought it up. No, I'm just kidding. But I love playing outdoor gigs, and I will play select indoor gigs like the Great American Music Hall.
Right.
Most of my music stuff these days are in the studio, which is where I'm logging in from right now. So I've got a studio with a couple of grand pianos and a multi-track record thing, and I'm able to do, you know, that kind of work without worrying about much of anything.
Right.
Nice. So are you doing, I was going to ask you, as far as the video stuff goes these days, are you still doing a lot of video production work and stuff and documentaries or anything?
Most of the work that I'm doing these days is more managerial from the standpoint of archiving, well, not archiving, because it's already archived, but making note of my years and years and years worth of dozens and dozens and dozens of hard drives with, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of shows on them, and trying to utilize the technology that now can give me a external 4 or 8 terabyte drive onto which I can put a stack of hard drives, you know? So that's admittedly taking up the bulk of my time because there's so much material. But the other side of that is that there's so much material. And for example, you know, starting with Axial Tilt 2015, the first one, I record all of my shows multi-track, and I capture all of my, I'm talking about the main shows. I'm not talking about like a, you know, little one-off bar show, not that there's anything wrong with it. But in that case, I will record stereo off of the board, and I'll have a single camera just for my own archive, not because I'm producing a, you know, commercially releasable video of any kind. But that's something that now, any of the shows that I'm producing, I really try my best to make sure that there's a pro video team and that we are recording multi-track, so that if for any reason there's something that happens with the stereo signal, I can always go back and fix it in post. Plus, in the context of, for example, at Jazzfest, we've got a room with a show going, and then I've got cables coming out to a separate mixer outside the venue with headphones, who's listening to everything that's going on, who can then mix for the live stream.
Right.
And if that mix is really good, then we essentially have our stereo mix.
Yeah.
But in many cases, it's not the ideal mix situation. And so something will get missed, or, you know, the guitarist will be taking a solo, ripping it, and the house guy will bring the
barely hear it, right,
down. And if the mixer doesn't catch it, then you kind of, you know, that guitar solo ripping is kind of in the background.
Yeah.
It's not ideal,
Fish went through a whole thing with they had one guy mixing the stream and the house at one point, right? And everybody complained about the sound in the venue because he was mixing for the stream, not the room.
Well, and vice versa. You know, and that's why personally I'm not a fan of one mixer doing both jobs.
Right.
Because they have to be constantly switching back and forth, and it's distracting, and they're not focused.
They brought in Vance Powell to do the live stream, so I think they made a good choice.
Well, you know, there are exceptions to every rule, of course.
Right. Well, no, they still had their normal sound guy. They brought him in as the extra
just to do the streams, just to do because they knew they needed a second guy. So but that's to your point. You need two guys doing it.
Really guys, and that's a whole other.
That's only fair to the people watching at home.
Yeah, exactly. Especially like we said before, if you're paying a subscription service or paying for that, if you're just watching off YouTube, you can get away, or like a free cert, you can kind of be like, all right, it's going to be what it is.
One camera on YouTube, it's all good.
It better sound damn good if I'm paying for it.
Well, and that's one of the things, as I mentioned, I do, I capture all of my shows multicam, and the long-term goal is that at some point I'm going to have a website where one can go and view years worth of shows from the Cafe Istanbul Night Fest from 2015 on, where you'll be able to go and check out, because it's a wide variety of shows, from these kinds of shows that we're talking about to this year. I had the Nicholas Payton trio with Esperanza Spalding and Kareem Riggins. I mean, these are high level jazz players, Grammy winners. You mentioned Bernard Purdy a little while ago.
Yeah.
That's an example of, again, it never hurts to ask. I tracked down Bernard Purdy, who is, according to him and many people, the most recorded drummer in history. I reached out to him, I introduced myself, and I said, I know this is out of the blue, but would you have any interest in perhaps coming to Jazz Fest, and I will showcase you? And he was like, yeah, that sounds good. So I put together this event called Bernard Purdy's Party. And we had Robert Walter and Jason Crosby, I think, played one of them, and Will Bernard, and just incredible musicians. And we played all songs, including some Steely Dan stuff.
Of course, you got
which Purdy played, and Aretha Franklin's famous album at the Fillmore. He's the drummer on that. Again, living legend.
He has a shuffle named after him.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And so, and he was, nothing but appreciative for the opportunity, because he knows himself. He knows the impact he's had. He doesn't really come across as an egomaniac at all.
Right.
And he's just a very sincere, kind of down to earth, but very focused musician, and very protective of his brand, the name, people, telling stories about him. And, I think he really understands and appreciates what he has brought to everyone. And I know I do. And I know the people who have seen his shows, we did the one in New Orleans, and then I recreated it at Sweetwater, which was a sellout, and people were just loving it. So I really enjoyed putting together things like that. In fact, this year I brought back Garage Mahal.
Oh, nice.
When I say brought back, I mean, I brought them to Jazz.
It wasn't Eric Levy. You didn't have Eric Levy, right? It wasn't Eric Levy, right? It wasn't Eric Levy.
No. It's Oz Ezeldin, who is mind-blowingly good on guitar, and it's still Kai, and they had Hassan Hurd on drums.
Okay.
That quartet is just killing.
Mm-hmm. Eric Levy, who originally played for them, now plays for Night Ranger. Yeah. Which just boggles my mind that he was the keyboard player in Garage Mahal, and now he plays for Night Ranger.
Well, I mean, Eric is just an incredible player, and he's so flexible, obviously.
And a great guy. We got to interview him once. We got to talk to him. He's a really great guy.
He's definitely a good guy. And so I really try to mix it up so that it's not just rock or not just, jam band, so that I continue to honor New Orleans, the musicians who live there, and the people who support the musicians who live there, because it has become my second home, essentially, at least for 2.5 weeks every year.
Right.
I love that you're in two great musical meccas for everything you do, though, too. Like San Francisco, the heart of where the Dead came from, and sort of where that all began, and all of the great musicians that are there for that. And then New Orleans, which is just seeping with musical awesomeness and everything, even when it's not Jazz Fest, but especially around Jazz Fest.
On any Tuesday night, yeah.
Yeah, so it's awesome. Yeah, random Tuesday night, it's seeping with it.
Yeah.
So it's just, I love that.
There you go. And one of the, I was just reminded of the fact that the San Francisco Giants reached out to me to ask if my band Cryptical would be the exclusive performers at the very first tribute to Jerry Garcia night that the Giants did. And we did that. And before the show, we played in, I forget what they call it, something alley, not on the main field, but off the side. And Bill and Mickey came by and started jamming with us. And then after that, we got out on top of the Cubs dugout, I think it was the Cubs, and played to the stadium, for 20 minutes or whatever. And
I love it.
And then, I think it was I'm trying to remember if Bobby threw out the first pitch. I think it was Bobby and maybe Jeff Pearson.
Okay, Jeff.
Further, and of course, the great local band Box Set. If people out there haven't heard of Box Set, do yourself a favor. Track down Box Set, featuring Jeff Pearson out of Further.
I'm going to be a broken record that we've had Jeff on also.
Yeah, well, it's a wonderful community here, and
it's
Box
great.
Set, I'll just throw it out there.
And his wife has a really cool podcast. If you like just listening to podcasts about the marijuana I planted, I think it's called.
I know she does. I know she does. Just I'm really fortunate to be living and working where I am, surrounded by such amazing people, and being able to take that outside of the Bay Area and present it to other people in other cities is just a joy.
Definitely.
It's fantastic.
I love it.
All right, we're gonna wrap this up.
I want to
hang out.
30 minutes. Let's.
Right. Yeah. Hang out for a minute because we need it to upload to the cloud and everything. If you're watching this later, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment if you can. And I'm gonna run an outro. Then I'm gonna stop it so we have everything on one tape to run.
And if you're heading up for the big celebration up in San Francisco this summer for the Dead 60, go check out.
I would interject and say, if you're coming out for the shows in Golden Gate Park and you want to come to a great after party on Sunday, get yourself to gamh.com and get some tickets, because they will be sold out. There's no question.
There you go.
Get your tickets ahead of
The other thing I'll mention is if you go to deadshows.com, dead shows with a Z, one word, DEADSHOWZ.com. That's the app I was talking about earlier. And I neglected to mention that app is endorsed by John Barlow, Grateful Dead lyricist. Before he passed, we reached out to him and asked if he would be interested in checking it out, which he did, and he loved it. And we said, would you be willing to endorse it? And he said, absolutely. So he gave us a letter of endorsement. And so I'm just trying to do my part of shameless self-promotion and let folks out know. Because, for example, Dead Shows was one of the main vendors for the entire 18-show run of Dead & Company in Las Vegas. Okay. And people universally have reached out to us to thank us for creating that app, because for Deadheads, it's, again, I made it for myself, made a Deadhead, but for everybody else, who wants to know the minutia, you can go to any set list and tap and hold on any song in that list, and you get a pop-up showing you the first day that they played it, the last date that they played it, and the total number of times that they played it. There's so many features in Dead Shows. I won't waste the time, but check that out. You know,
Yeah,
and
for
the only
sure,
thing I
check
will
that
say
out.
about that, because that's the first question that most people ask, although I appreciate you not asking, how much does it cost? So as with video, you know, it was not a cheap proposition to start this whole thing from scratch. And we now have the most powerful proprietary search engine that was created for this. And the entire project has been curated by Mike Dolgoshin and Stu Nixon from Deadbase.
Right.
So
Right,
I've got
right.
the guys who are in charge of the
Okay.
Grateful Dead encyclopedia, if you will. Basically curating the entire thing. So, and it's $1. I'm sorry, it's $2.99. I almost.
Oh,
So it is definitely
A month?
$2.99,
Per month?
which is less than $3 and way less than a grilled cheese sandwich in the parking lot.
That's right.
And it's a one-time purchase. There are no ads.
It's not
there's
even
no
monthly.
subscription.
Oh, geez.
not
yeah.
even monthly. We charge $2.99 a month to be a member.
For monthly subscription. That's great. I mean, that's awesome. And I love
I'm
that.
just saying, I made it for me and everybody else, and I don't think that $2.99 is too much to ask. But if it is, don't buy it, and
You're right.
I will still be able to sleep at night.
There you
Don't
go.
love
forget.
it. It's
All
great.
right, hang out for a minute for us. All right.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.